Hello, and welcome to the second ever Hilltop Happy Hour. I hope you had a great week, are comfortable, you have a drink in hand, and you're ready to talk retirement planning. So today's topic, I think it's really important to cover because it's something that I think all investors should be aware of, and that's whether you're a DIYer or whether on the end of the spectrum, you're totally hands off and someone else is managing your assets. And the topic is if you have bond exposure, which most do, especially as they age, in your portfolio, in what form is that bond exposure? Is it in bond funds? Is it in individual bonds like a ladder? Or is it in bond funds that have a set end date similar to a maturity? And the reason I think every investor should know this is because I often feel portfolios are just expressed as a split of stocks versus bonds. So you might hear, oh, I have a 60-40 portfolio. Cool. I have 40% in bonds. And then that's kind of the end of the story. But to me, there is more to the story. And I think many experienced this in 2021 and 2022. And the reason I think it's so important to know whether you're in bond funds or individual bonds is because they act differently, especially when it comes to maturity, principal protection, and predictability. Now, neither is right or wrong, but I just believe they serve different purposes. And I think you should know which one you're in and which one probably serves your individual purpose. So really excited about today's happy hour. I can't wait to jump in. But before we start, let's go with the drink recipe. Now, there was no way I was not going to review a martini when we're talking about bonds. That's shaken, not stirred. Now, I know Bond drank a dry martini, but I wanted to review a dirty martini because these are just a staple of our household. But, either way, it's a timeless drink, classy, chic, honestly, both masculine and feminine at the same time, romantic. It's just hard to beat. Now, one thing we do that I think takes it to the next level is we stuff our own blue cheese olives. Let me see if I can show you. And I'm not going to go into the details here, but if you want to see how we do it, please join Hilltop's Instagram or Facebook page. Those are on the website, the little icons in the top. Just click and join because I'm going to post a video there where we're going to do a step-by-step. But anyway, I'm digressing. Cheers to our favorite topic of cocktail talk, bond pricing. Cheers. All right. Welcome back. So I'm going to try and review bonds really quickly, which is honestly impossible, but I will do my best, okay? So bonds are debt instruments issued by entities like governments or companies that want to raise money. You can think of yourself as a lender when you are buying bonds. Now, bonds provide steady income, which is why they're also known as fixed income. But let's look at an example of a bond to just review some language because I think that helps. So this is a hypothetical U.S. bond issued by the federal government, backed by the full faith and credit of the government, and that's represented by the house in the corner. So this right here is considered a very, very safe security. Now, there are three pieces of info you should know on each bond. Those are the maturity date, the coupon, and the par value, also known as a face value. The coupon indicates how much annual income the bond pays to the bondholder in the form of a percent of par value. So here you have a coupon of 5%. Well, 5% of par value, $1,000. So this would be $50 per year. If the coupon was 4% with a par value of $1,000, you guessed it, $40 per year. It's that simple. Now, the maturity date is a date the bond expires and the coupon payments cease to exist. However, on the maturity date, the bondholder will also receive the entire face value back. So that's really important. So the bondholder would get that last coupon payment and the $1,000 back. Now, bonds vary wildly in length when issued. For reference, the federal government issues bonds as short as 4 weeks to maturity and as long as 30 years. So also, I'm fully aware that there are exceptions to what I just mentioned, like zero coupon bonds, TIPS, I bonds, and convertible bonds. But for the simplicity's sake today, we are just going to focus on your standard coupon bond. Okay? Now, if you're like me, you may look at this maturity date and think, that's a long time to lock up my money. And so you might be wondering, hey, can I redeem these? You cannot. However, you can sell them. They're extremely marketable. But that's where things get a little complicated. And in order to understand individual bonds versus bond funds, which is kind of what we're talking about today, I do think it's critical to first understand how bond pricing works. Now, in order to do that, in my personal opinion, I think the easiest way to engage with the concept is through a narrative. So I'm going to run through an illustration here, albeit a functionally unrealistic one, but I just want to demonstrate how bond pricing works. So just stick with me. Okay, so let's take a character, let's call him Bob. Now, during the pandemic, Bob's trip to Hawaii got canceled, and so Bob had some extra cash, and the world was, to say at least, uncertain. So Bob decides to buy a treasury for its safety and predictability. Okay. So Bob went to the Treasury Direct and he bought this 10-year note at issue. Now, you may be looking at this and think, wow, that's a super low coupon. And yes, welcome to interest rates during the pandemic. But you got to remember, where else was Bob going to put his money? It's not like savings accounts were paying 5% back then. So fast forward 5 years, and Bob just found out his daughter's getting married. Congratulations, Bob. The problem is Bob doesn't have cash on hand to pay for the wedding, but he remembers that he has a bond. He has a bond. He has this bond here. So this is the unrealistic part, okay? Because in reality, Bob could easily and quickly sell these through his brokerage account. But again, just for illustrative purposes, let's say Bob's neighbor, let's call her Sally, is nearing retirement and in the market for bonds. So Sally and Bob meet at the fence line, and Bob says, "Hey, Sally, I hear you might be interested in buying my bond." And Sally's like, "Yeah, I'm trying to build a bond ladder until I can claim Social Security. So I'm in the market. What do you got?" Right? So Bob slides the bond across the fence and says, "Here you go, Sally. That'll be $1,000, and let's just call it even." Now, Sally takes a look at this bond and she starts to laugh. And she says, "Bob, I'm not giving you $1,000 for this." And Bob's like, "Well, you get the face value. It's safe. You get interest. What's not to love, Sally?" So Sally shoves this in his face. Okay, you can see it here. And Bob gets nervous and asks, "Well, what's that, Sally?" Now, Sally says, "I don't know if you remember this, Bob, but since you bought that thing, we had this whole inflation problem. Well, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates to slow down inflation. So now I can go to Treasury Direct and buy one of these bad boys. I mean, look at that coupon. Why would I pay full price for that when I can just go get this at issue?" So Bob, realizing what's going on, starts to spiral, and he's like, "Come on, Sally, it's for my daughter's wedding." And Sally's like, "You know what, Bob, I like you. I like you. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back in my house, and I'm going to go do some math. And I'm going to figure out exactly how much we need to discount your bond, in order for it to yield a comparable amount to what I could get now." And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how bond prices are inversely correlated to interest rates. See, you could also imagine, should interest rates drop to where they were before, well, this bond that Sally just bought, it would be a hot commodity, right? You couldn't go get that coupon issue anymore. So Sally would actually be able to sell it then for a premium. Okay, so are we good so far? I know it's kind of weird. Just wrap your mind around that for a second. And now let's throw in another wrinkle, right? Let's go back to Bob. So Bob's daughter comes back to him and says, "Dad, this wedding is going to be not my magical dream unless I have a mariachi band." And Bob's like, "Oh my God, okay, now I need a mariachi band." Again, he doesn't have the cash on hand, but he remembers that he also bought a 5-year note back in 2020. Okay, maybe Sally's interested in that too. So they meet back at the fence. Sally's like, "I heard about the whole mariachi things." Bob's like, "Don't even get me started. But what would you give me for this?" So he hands Sally this bond, and Sally starts to laugh again. She says, "You fool, look at this coupon. It's worse than the other one. Man, we're really going to discount this one. I'm going to even discount it more than the other one." And Bob's like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa. Not so fast, Sally. Look at the maturity date. This thing matures in a month. Yeah, the coupon isn't great, but you have less than one coupon to receive. You're 4 weeks away from this thing. You're getting the full face value back. It's like $1,000 in your pocket. I'm going to barely discount it." And so what Bob just pointed out is how length to maturity also affects bond pricing. Okay, now let's quickly look at a graph that shows us how this relationship works. You can see it here. Here you can see bonds issued with different coupons above or below the current yield, but with the same maturity date, and how those prices rise or fall based on how far the above or below they are from the current yield. However, you can also see how these prices all trend towards par at maturity. Now, I think this is super important for investors to understand, because if you own individual bonds, even if there is a substantial change in interest rates and you have some sticker shock for what you could sell them on the secondary market now, you can still sleep at night knowing they will trend towards par value as they get closer to maturity. And if you do hold them to maturity, you will get the full face value back. Now, sure, you miss out on what new interest rates are paying now, but you do get exactly what you were expecting when you bought it. Okay. And for some, that's the sole purpose for bonds. Okay. So that is individual bonds. Let's talk bond funds. Before we do, I think we've earned ourselves a study break. So let's just take 5 seconds and look at my elder Pekingese, Kurt, as he tries to put on a sweater. Here we go. So bond funds. Well, bond funds can either be mutual funds or an ETF form. And what makes them funds is that you own a share in a pooled vehicle that owns many bonds itself. And in some cases, this could be thousands and thousands of bonds. Now, just like equity ETFs, mutual funds serve different objectives. So too do bond funds. For instance, they could be high yield fund, municipality, they could be based on duration length, or just a aggregate, to name a few. Bond funds are a great simple way to own a single fund that gives you diversity through exposure to a ton of different issuers of debt, and you still get your share of the income distributed by the bond holdings and the face value maturity. So that's great, right? But, and this is the big difference, and honestly is kind of the crux of today's happy hour, is bond funds don't have a single maturity date. And that should make sense because we're talking about thousands of bonds here that are constantly maturing and being bought inside the fund. You can't point to a specific date and say, I know I'm getting all the face value back on this specific day in a similar way you could if you just owned a single bond. Okay. So, why does this matter? Well, I think owning individual bonds versus a bond fund really serve two different purposes, as bond themselves can be multi-purpose. So, for instance, if you want bond exposure in your overall portfolio to just lower volatility, increase income, and are looking for something not directly correlated with equities, I think bond funds can serve that purpose great, right? And you can probably see this in your 401k even. If you dig into what's known as target date funds, which actually just increase bond fund exposure as you near retirement for simply that purpose, to de-risk by increasing exposure to bonds. Okay? However, bonds can also be viewed as predictable payments of income and return of face value to match specific liabilities. Okay, so for instance, in this case, let's say you want 5 years of safe, predictable income that covers your budget in retirement. I think a bond ladder better serves its purpose. And that's because you know exactly what you're going to get, when you're going to get it. Okay, and let me put this another way. If you are planning to hold individual bonds to maturity and not sell so that you know exactly what you're going to get so you can give yourself some income, how much do you really care if bonds are changing or the price of the bonds are changing because of rise or falls to interest rates? Probably not a ton, right? And just to go back, for those wondering what a bond ladder is, it's simply buying a series of individual bonds that have staggered maturities, often provide that steady income through coupon payments and face value maturity. Okay. Well, okay, let's keep going. Now, there is, I guess you could call it like a hybrid of these two strategies, and that would be a target maturity bond ETF. That's a mouthful, but just stick with me. There are several different issuers of these, and you should be able to spot them since they all should have a year in their name. So, like for instance, XYZ 2026 corporate bond ETF, right? So, how do these work? Well, the reason they have a date in their name is because all of the bond holdings of this fund should have an effective maturity within that same year. Now, they're all not going to be in the same date, but you can still ladder these funds in a similar manner to individual bonds in order to match liabilities, right? So you could think that there's kind of like a hybrid of the two. And these could be a great option if you are seeking diversification and a variety of different bonds in a single fund, but you want all of the bonds within that fund to have a similar maturity date, right? And so that's kind of it. I know that was super high level, and I hope I didn't confuse you. And I know there's a lot I didn't cover. Um, but I hope that if you didn't have any background before today's video in bonds, and you can walk away from today's happy hour with a little bit more foundation to build on. And really, my ultimate hope, is that if you do have a bond exposure in your portfolio, now you can be better informed of what vehicle that exposure is in and why or why not that is suitable for your needs. Okay. Just like last week, I had a ton of fun to today's happy hour. I really love doing these. I hope you did too. I can't wait for the next one. And until then, if there's one thing I want you to remember, is that you were never, ever, ever over the hill at Hilltop Planning. All right. Until next time, take care of yourself.